In the rain-soaked foothills of North Carolina, a gripping drama unfolded. Near a rushing creek, swollen from the relentless storm, amidst the swirling chaos, a sinister circle of crows gathered. Their menacing calls echoed through the air, a chilling prelude to the desperate struggle of a tiny, defenseless bobcat cub trapped and fighting for its very life. Suddenly, a beacon of hope appeared. Dr. Emily Carter, a dedicated wildlife biologist, stumbled upon this heart-wrenching scene. An impossible choice slammed into her: intervene and risk disrupting the delicate balance of nature, or stand by and witness its brutal course. But sometimes, the wild itself reaches out in ways that tug at our deepest humanity, begging us to reconsider the fragile line between instinct and compassion. As Emily stepped into the downpour, neither she nor the tiny cub could possibly know the profound way this moment would forever alter their lives. What happens when survival hinges on the kindness of a stranger? And how much courage does it take to defy nature itself? This is the unforgettable story of a fragile life, fierce resilience, and the extraordinary bond forged when the wild meets the unwavering heart of humanity. Before we dive in, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to click that notification bell so you won't miss any of our incredible wildlife stories. The air hung heavy with moisture in the quaint town of Cedar Creek. Nestled at the base of the Appalachian Mountains in western North Carolina, relentless April showers had transformed into a torrential downpour overnight, flooding the streets and turning gentle streams into raging torrents. Dr. Emily Carter, a respected wildlife biologist and professor at the local community college, peered through the water droplets cascading down her windshield. She carefully navigated the waterlogged roads on her way home from an emergency faculty meeting. At 42 years old, Emily had dedicated her entire life to understanding and protecting the diverse wildlife of the region. Her modest home sat on the outskirts of town, backing up to a protected forest where she often spent weekends immersed in her crucial research. Her colleagues sometimes teased her, saying she was more comfortable with animals than people. But Emily never minded. There was an undeniable honesty in animals that humans often lacked. The rain had finally begun to ease, though ominous dark clouds still loomed overhead. Emily slowed her aging Subaru as she approached the bridge spanning Whispering Creek. Now a thunderous, coffee-colored surge of water carrying debris from upstream. Something caught her eye: movement near the drainage culvert where the roadside gutter emptied into the creek. At first, she dismissed it as just trash caught in the powerful current. But then, she noticed the unmistakable fluttering of black wings. Several crows, at least 5 or 6, had gathered in a noisy, agitated circle, taking turns diving at something trapped against the grate covering the culvert entrance. "What on earth?" Emily muttered, pulling her car to the shoulder and flicking on her hazard lights. Grabbing her trusty rain jacket from the passenger seat, she stepped out into the persistent drizzle, squinting against the mist. The crows cawed angrily as she approached, reluctantly retreating a few feet, but stubbornly refusing to abandon their target. As she drew closer, Emily's heart sank with a heavy thud. There, wedged against the grate and barely keeping its tiny head above the churning water, was a small, sodden ball of fur. A bobcat cub. The minuscule creature couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Its characteristic spotted coat was plastered against its frail body. Cruelly, one of the bolder crows swooped down, striking at the cub's head with its sharp beak. The little bobcat flinched, but made no sound, too utterly exhausted to even cry out. Another crow landed nearby, hopping closer, eager for its chance to attack the defenseless animal. "Hey, get away from there!" Emily shouted, waving her arms frantically and rushing forward. The crows scattered momentarily, circling overhead with indignant cries, before settling in nearby trees to watch with cold, calculating eyes. Emily knelt by the gutter, completely heedless of the muddy water soaking through her jeans. The cub was in terrible shape. Its breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps, and its head lolled at an unnatural angle. Small, bloody wounds dotted its face and ears where the crows had landed their vicious pecks. One eye was swollen shut, and blood had matted the fur around its right ear. "Oh, you poor little thing," Emily whispered, her expert eyes quickly assessing the devastating damage. The bobcat had likely been tragically separated from its mother during the violent storm, washed away by the relentless floodwaters, and stranded in the unforgiving drainage system where the opportunistic crows had found it. The repeated attacks to its fragile head, combined with the trauma of being swept away, had clearly caused some serious neurological damage. The uneven pupils and the unnatural tilt of its head suggested a grave brain injury. Emily knew the cub's chances were heartbreakingly slim. Wild animals, especially predators like bobcats, rarely survive such severe trauma. The most humane thing might be to simply let nature take its cruel course. Yet, something in the way the tiny creature desperately struggled to keep its head above the raging water, refusing to surrender despite the overwhelming odds stacked against it, struck a deep and resonant chord within her. A car slowed as it passed, the driver leaning out to call, "Everything okay, ma'am?" "Yes, fine," Emily called back, instinctively shielding the cub from view. "Just checking something in the drainage." The car drove on. Several more passed as Emily wrestled with her conscience, none stopping. The world continued its relentless spin, utterly indifferent to the small, silent drama unfolding by the roadside. "I can't just leave you here," she finally decided, her voice thick with emotion. Gently, she scooped up the waterlogged cub. It weighed almost nothing in her hands, a fragile collection of bones and matted fur, trembling uncontrollably with cold and fear. For a fleeting moment, one golden eye, the one not swollen shut, fixed on Emily's face. There was no trust, no accusation, just a raw, primal acknowledgement of her presence in what might be its final moments. "I'm going to call you Max," Emily found herself saying, her voice soft with a newfound tenderness, as she cradled the cub inside her jacket for warmth. "It means greatest, and you're going to need to be the greatest fighter ever to pull through this." The Mountain View Veterinary Hospital was nearly 30 minutes away, the only facility in the area with a dedicated wildlife specialist on staff. Emily called ahead on her hands-free system as she drove, her voice tight with urgency, explaining the dire situation to Dr. Alan Davies, who had collaborated with Emily on several crucial wildlife research projects in the past. "A bobcat cub with head trauma?" Alan's voice crackled through the car speakers, laced with concern. "Emily, you know the prognosis isn't good." "I know," Emily admitted, glancing at the bundle of towels she'd carefully placed in a box on the passenger seat. She'd cranked the heat despite the mild spring day, desperately trying to warm the cub's dangerously cold body. "But I couldn't leave him there to be pecked to death." Alan sighed heavily. "Bring him in. We'll do what we can, but prepare yourself. These cases rarely end well." The veterinary hospital was eerily quiet when Emily arrived. The relentless rainy day having kept most routine appointments away. Alan met her at the back entrance, already wearing sterile surgical gloves and a grim expression that softened ever so slightly. when he saw the protective way Emily carried the box. "Let's see what we've got," he said gently, leading the way to a brightly lit examination room. Under the harsh, fluorescent lights, Max looked even worse than he had by the roadside. The full, devastating extent of his injuries became horrifyingly clear as Alan gently examined him, his experienced hands moving with practiced efficiency. The cub remained unnaturally still throughout the examination, far too weak to resist. "Multiple lacerations to the head and neck," Alan noted, his voice grave. "Severe concussion, possible skull fracture, and he's significantly dehydrated. He's also dangerously underweight for his age, probably separated from his mother before the storm." Emily watched anxiously, her heart pounding in her chest. "Can you help him?" Alan hesitated, his brow furrowed with concern. "Normally, I'd recommend anesthesia for a full assessment and to properly clean those wounds. But he's far too weak. The anesthesia would likely kill him before we could even begin treatment." Emily felt a lump the size of a golf ball forming in her throat, threatening to choke her. "So, we do nothing?" "I didn't say that." Alan's voice softened, a hint of determination in his tone. "We'll start by slowly warming him, administering fluids for the dehydration, and giving him broad-spectrum antibiotics to prevent infection from those nasty wounds. If, and it's a big if, he makes it through the night, we can reassess in the morning. He'll need around-the-clock monitoring." Emily nodded, her mind already racing, calculating how to rearrange her entire schedule. Alan gave her a knowing look. "You're planning to take him home, aren't you? Despite everything I've taught you about not getting attached to wild patients?" Emily met his gaze steadily, her resolve unwavering. "Someone needs to watch him. Your overnight staff is already stretched thin, and I have experience with wildlife rehabilitation." Alan conceded with a sigh. "All right, Emily. But you need to be brutally realistic. This cub is far more likely to die than survive, no matter what we do." "I understand," Emily said quietly, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "But he deserves a chance." 3 grueling hours later, Emily carefully carried a small animal carrier out to her Subaru. Inside, nestled snugly and wrapped in special thermal blankets, Max lay unconscious but stable. His wounds had been meticulously cleaned and treated with antibiotic ointment, and Alan had patiently shown Emily how to administer subcutaneous fluids and liquid medication. A small arsenal of essential supplies filled a box in her trunk. Special formula for orphaned predator cubs, feeding syringes, more medications, and detailed handwritten instructions for his complex care. "Call me if there's any change, day or night," Alan had insisted, his voice firm with concern. "And Emily, please try not to get your hopes up too high." The relentless rain had finally stopped by the time Emily arrived back at her cozy cabin. Water still dripped rhythmically from the eaves. Inside, she transformed her rarely used guest room into a makeshift wildlife intensive care unit. She carefully set up a heating pad beneath soft, comforting blankets in a large plastic storage container. A temporary enclosure that would keep Max safe and secure while providing enough precious space for him to move, if he miraculously regained the strength to do so. Max remained unnaturally still as she gently transferred him to his new bed, meticulously adjusting the heating pad to ensure a gentle, consistent warmth that wouldn't overheat his tiny, fragile body. According to Alan's best estimate, he couldn't be more than 5 weeks old, barely weaned under normal circumstances. His once beautiful golden brown fur, though beginning to dry, still looked patchy and dull, against the stark white fleece blanket. "You're safe now," Emily whispered to him, knowing he couldn't hear or understand her words, but needing to make the heartfelt promise anyway. "Just hold on, little fighter." The evening stretched into an interminable night as Emily meticulously monitored Max's precarious condition, checking his shallow breathing every 15 agonizing minutes and recording each tiny observation in a dedicated notebook. Twice during the long night, she carefully administered fluids as Alan had shown her, gently inserting the tiny needle between his delicate shoulder blades to deliver life-sustaining hydration directly beneath his skin. Each time, she held her breath, fearing the slightest pain might push his fragile system over the edge. But Max remained stubbornly stable, not improving dramatically, but thankfully not declining either. At the stroke of midnight, Emily forced herself to eat a meager sandwich, though her stomach was churning with anxiety, and she had absolutely no appetite. She'd already made the difficult decision to cancel her morning classes, sending a detailed email to her department chair explaining the extraordinary situation. Max wouldn't be left alone, not while his precious life hung by such a tenuous thread. By 2 a.m., Emily's eyes burned with exhaustion, her eyelids feeling like sandpaper. She pulled a comfortable armchair beside Max's enclosure, promising herself she would rest for just a moment while still keeping a vigilant watch. Outside, the wind had picked up, whispering eerily through the towering pine trees surrounding her cabin with a sound like distant, crashing waves. She must have drifted off despite her best intentions, for when she suddenly jerked awake, pale dawn light was filtering weakly through the window blinds. Panic seized her, a cold wave washing over her. She leaned over the container, her heart pounding in her chest. Had she slept through a critical moment? Had Max slipped away silently while she succumbed to overwhelming exhaustion? But then, she saw him. His small rib cage was still rising and falling with shallow, fragile breaths, and something else. Something that made Emily's weary heart leap with a surge of hope. One eye, the less damaged one, was partially open, a tiny sliver of wild gold visible beneath the swollen lid. When Emily moved her hand slowly above him, the eye tracked the movement, unfocused but undeniably responsive. "Max?" she whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. The cub didn't move, but his breathing seemed ever so slightly stronger than it had been the long night before. Cautiously optimistic, Emily prepared a minuscule amount of the special formula Alan had provided, carefully drawing it into a syringe without a needle. With exquisite gentleness, she lifted Max's tiny head and placed a single, precious drop of the life-giving liquid on his tongue. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, his tiny throat worked in a weak, almost imperceptible swallow. Tears sprang unbidden to Emily's tired eyes. It was the smallest of victories, a mere flicker of hope, but a victory nonetheless. Max had miraculously made it through the perilous night and was showing the very first fragile signs of recovery. She called Alan immediately, her voice trembling with emotion. "He's responsive." The usually stoic veterinarian sounded genuinely surprised. "And he took nutrition. That's honestly unexpected. Should I bring him in?" Emily asked, reluctant to move the fragile cub, but willing to do absolutely anything that offered the best possible chance of survival. "If he's stable and responding, let's not stress him with transport right now," Alan decided, his voice thoughtful. "Continue the protocol we discussed. Fluids, antibiotics, small feedings every 2 hours if he'll take them. I'll come by after my last appointment to personally check on him." The day passed in a frantic blur of incredibly careful feedings, precise medication administration, and anxious, unwavering observation. By late afternoon, Max had miraculously consumed almost 15 milliliters of the special formula, a minuscule amount in the grand scheme of things, but significantly more than Alan had dared to hope he would manage. The alarming swelling around his injured eye had begun to subside ever so slightly, and while his small head still tilted at an awkward, concerning angle, he seemed more aware of his surroundings, his tiny golden eye occasionally tracking Emily's movements. Alan arrived just after 7 p.m., carrying his well-worn medical bag and sporting a cautious expression that visibly gave way to genuine surprise when he thoroughly examined Max. "His temperature is almost normal," he noted, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and astonishment as he checked the digital thermometer. "Hydration has improved, and his neurological response is still concerning, but definitely better than I anticipated." A hopeful question hung in the air. "So, he has a chance?" Emily tried desperately to keep the overwhelming surge of hope from flooding her voice. Alan sighed softly, removing his stethoscope from his ears. "He's still critically ill, Emily. The next 48 hours will tell us much more, but yes, he has a chance. A significantly better one than I would have given him yesterday." Those crucial 48 hours stretched into days, and those days slowly morphed into weeks. Max's arduous recovery was far from smooth or straightforward. There were disheartening setbacks, a terrifying day when he stubbornly refused to eat anything, a frightening episode of seizure-like tremors that sent Emily rushing him to Alan's clinic in the dead of night, and periods of concerning lethargy that made her fear they were losing precious ground. But then, there were also glorious triumphs that filled Emily's heart with joy and renewed hope. The first miraculous time Max managed to hold his small head steady for more than just a few fleeting seconds. The unforgettable morning he actively resisted Emily's gentle attempts to clean his face with a warm cloth, showing the very first flicker of wild defiance that was his true nature. The incredible day he pushed himself up onto wobbly, unsteady legs, standing for a brief, glorious moment before collapsing back into his soft bedding. 3 weeks after the dramatic rescue, Emily carefully moved Max from his small plastic container to a much larger, more comfortable enclosure on her screened porch. A wonderful space that offered fresh air and natural sunlight while still keeping him completely safe and secure. His once dull coat had regained its beautiful luster, the distinctive spots that clearly marked him as a bobcat now standing out against the tawny background. The wounds on his fragile head had healed remarkably well, leaving only small, bare patches that Alan assured Emily would eventually fill in with new fur. The neurological damage, while still present, was thankfully less severe than initially feared. Max's head still tilted slightly to one side, and his balance remained somewhat imperfect. He sometimes misjudged distances when enthusiastically attempting to pounce on the various enrichment toys Emily lovingly provided, but his bright golden eyes were sharp and alert, tracking every movement with the intense focus of a born predator. "He's a miracle case," Alan admitted during a routine checkup as they watched Max stalk and then playfully attack a feather toy with surprising coordination. "I've honestly never seen a wild animal recover from this level of severe trauma." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with affection for the resilient little cub, though a familiar worry tugged gently at her conscience. What happens now? He's not releasable, is he? They both knew the heartbreaking answer. Despite his truly remarkable recovery, Max's permanent, though thankfully mild, neurological impairments would make survival in the unforgiving wild absolutely impossible. He simply couldn't be returned to a world where perfect hunting skills and razor-sharp reflexes were the crucial difference between life and agonizing death. "I've been making some calls," Alan said carefully, his voice gentle. "The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center over in Asheville might have some space. They have excellent permanent enclosures specifically designed for non-releasable native predators, and they also run fantastic education programs." Emily nodded slowly, trying to ignore the hollow ache that had begun to form in her chest. She'd known from the very beginning that saying goodbye was inevitable. She simply wasn't equipped to provide a permanent home for a wild bobcat, even one as incredibly special as Max. Her small cabin, her busy lifestyle, and the strict laws governing wildlife all made it impossible for her to keep him, no matter how deeply attached she had become. When would they take him? She asked, her voice sounding surprisingly steadier than she actually felt. "They can likely make space sometime next month. He'll need to be a bit stronger first anyway." Alan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You saved his life, Emily. Now, you need to give him the chance at the very best life possible, even if it's not out in the wild." The following weeks took on a bittersweet quality as Emily poured all her love and energy into helping Max grow stronger, while simultaneously preparing her heart for the inevitable day she would have to let him go. She meticulously documented his every tiny progress, both for the rehabilitation center's detailed records and for her own precious memories. Her phone quickly filled with heartwarming videos. Max pouncing awkwardly but with boundless enthusiasm on a rolling ball. Max finally figuring out how to confidently climb onto the special platform she'd built in his enclosure. Max sleeping peacefully in a warm patch of sunlight, his small body curled into a perfect, contented circle on a beautiful late May morning, almost exactly 1 month after the harrowing rescue. On that poignant morning in late May, Emily sat quietly on the floor of the screened porch, her gaze filled with affection as she watched Max intently explore a brand new enrichment puzzle she had painstakingly created. A sturdy box with strategically placed holes containing hidden, tempting treats that required clever problem-solving skills to access. His coordination had improved dramatically over the past few weeks, though the slight, endearing tilt of his head remained a permanent reminder of his near-fatal ordeal. Suddenly, a subtle movement outside caught her attention. A lone crow had landed gracefully on the railing of her open deck, its glossy black feathers shimmering with an iridescent sheen in the bright morning light. Emily tensed instinctively, a fleeting, chilling memory of the ominous attack that had nearly claimed Max's fragile life flashing through her mind. But this was just one bird, going about its natural business, not the sinister gathering by the flood-swollen gutter. To her utter surprise, Max had noticed the crow too. He froze mid-play, his small body lowering instinctively into a focused hunting crouch. The unsuspecting crow, completely separated from the potential predator by the sturdy screen, seemed utterly unaware of the inherent danger, casually preening its wing feathers. Max's bright golden eyes narrowed with intense concentration, his small body tensing with primal energy. For a brief, powerful moment, Emily glimpsed the wild creature he truly was. Not the dependent patient she had lovingly nursed back to health, but a born predator with ancient instincts encoded in every single cell of his being. Despite his lingering injuries, despite his uncertain future, Max carried the untamed essence of his wild species deep within him. The crow eventually took flight, completely unaware of how its brief presence had profoundly transformed the quiet morning. Max remained alert for several minutes afterward, his gaze scanning the deck with the intense focus of a much older and far more experienced hunter. When he finally returned to his beloved puzzle box, Emily felt a strange, complex mix of both profound pride and a deep, undeniable melancholy wash over her. This, she realized with absolute certainty, was precisely why she needed to let him go. Not because she couldn't continue to care for him. She would have willingly rearranged her entire life to do so if that had truly been the right thing for Max. But because he deserved the opportunity to fulfill as much of his natural potential as his injuries would possibly allow. The dedicated rehabilitation center would provide him with opportunities she simply couldn't. Larger, more stimulating spaces, expert professional care, and perhaps even the much-needed company of other rescued bobcats who also couldn't safely return to the wild. The day of the transfer arrived far too quickly, each passing hour feeling like a stolen moment. Emily had meticulously prepared everything. The special comforting carrier, Max's favorite soft blanket, detailed, comprehensive records of his medical history and behavioral patterns, and even a heartfelt letter for his future caretakers, carefully explaining his unique preferences and endearing quirks. Alan arrived early that morning to help with the emotional transfer, bringing a mild sedative to help reduce Max's stress during the 2-hour drive to Asheville. "Are you absolutely sure you don't want me to take him?" he offered gently, watching Emily's careful, almost ritualistic preparations. "I know how incredibly hard this is for you." Emily shook her head firmly, her resolve unwavering despite the tears welling in her eyes. "No. I need to see where he's going. I need to know, with my own eyes, that he'll be okay." The Blue Ridge Wildlife Center occupied a sprawling, picturesque property nestled in the majestic mountains outside of Asheville. As Emily followed the winding driveway, she caught reassuring glimpses of large, naturalistic enclosures housing various native species that, just like Max, couldn't survive on their own in the wild, but served as invaluable ambassadors for crucial conservation education. The center's director, a kind, silver-haired woman named Margaret with decades of dedicated experience in wildlife rehabilitation, greeted them warmly. "We've prepared a special quarantine space for young Max," she explained with a gentle smile, leading them to a separate building away from the main visitor center. "Once he's fully adjusted and medically cleared, we have exciting plans for him to join our junior ambassador program." She proudly showed Emily the spacious, thoughtfully designed enclosure where Max would eventually live. A truly impressive space, complete with sturdy climbing structures, secure hiding spots, and a wealth of environmental enrichment that far exceeded anything Emily had been able to provide in her small guest room. 2 other rescued bobcats, both adults with their own unique injuries that had rendered them non-releasable, occupied similar impressive enclosures nearby. "We'll introduce them gradually once Max is ready," Margaret explained patiently. Many of our rescued bobcats actually form surprisingly strong social bonds despite their naturally solitary nature in the wild. It's one of the fascinating adaptations we often observe in our permanent residents. The actual moment of goodbye was both agonizingly harder and surprisingly easier than Emily had anticipated. Max, thankfully drowsy from the mild sedative, barely registered the gentle transfer to his temporary quarantine space. His familiar, comforting blanket went with him, carrying the comforting scent of the only home he had truly known during his remarkable recovery. "You can visit any time, Emily," Margaret assured her, her eyes filled with understanding as she recognized the raw emotion Emily was valiantly trying to contain. "Many of our dedicated rescuers become regular volunteers. Max won't ever forget you." On the quiet drive back home, Emily's cozy cabin felt emptier than it had in years. A profound silence echoing in the rooms that had recently been filled with Max's quiet presence. She moved through the evening in a mechanical daze, carefully packing away Max's few belongings, meticulously cleaning his enclosure. and thoughtfully filing away her detailed notes on his intricate care. Alan had kindly invited her to dinner, concerned about her being alone with her grief. But Emily had politely declined. She desperately needed this quiet time to process the significant change, to let the emotions wash over her without interruption. As darkness gently fell, she found herself sitting on her familiar porch, gazing out at the vast, dark forest that stretched beyond her small yard. Somewhere deep within those silent woods, wild bobcats lived their secret lives, unseen and untroubled by human awareness. Max would never truly be one of them again. But he was alive, he was safe, and he now had a meaningful purpose and a bright future, all because she had refused to look away from a small, unfolding tragedy in a rain-soaked roadside gutter. Suddenly, a familiar flutter of wings caught her attention. A crow, perhaps the very same one from those tense days before, perhaps just another, landed gracefully on her deck railing, regarding her with a curious tilted head and a bright, intelligent eye in the fading light. In that moment, it looked far less sinister than simply contemplative, a wild creature following its own inherent nature. Emily thought back to the crows that had attacked Max, not with anger or resentment now, but with a deeper, more profound understanding. They hadn't been malicious. They had simply been opportunistic predators themselves, following instincts honed by millennia of evolution. The true miracle wasn't that she had intervened in nature's often harsh cycle, but that from that single act of intervention, something truly new and incredibly valuable had emerged. Max, against all odds, would now help countless visitors understand and deeply value the precious wild creatures that shared their world. The crow took flight, a dark shadow against the rapidly darkening sky. Tomorrow, Emily knew, she would call the Blue Ridge Wildlife Center to check on her brave little fighter. Next weekend, she would undoubtedly drive up to Asheville to visit him. And perhaps, when the semester finally ended, she would enthusiastically take Margaret up on her generous offer to volunteer. Life would undoubtedly continue, different now, but still meaningful and full of purpose. For now, she simply sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the soothing night sounds of the forest, feeling deeply connected to something far larger than herself. The complex, sometimes brutal, but always wondrous web of life that had brought a struggling bobcat cub and a dedicated wildlife biologist together on a rainy April afternoon. Max's incredible story wasn't truly over. In so many important ways, it was just beautifully beginning. Valuable lesson. This heartwarming story reminds us that while nature often operates on a seemingly harsh principle of survival of the fittest, there are moments when compassion and human intervention can create extraordinary outcomes. Saving Max's life not only gave him a second chance, but also provided an opportunity for him to become an ambassador for his species, fostering understanding and respect for wildlife. It highlights the delicate balance between respecting the natural world and our responsibility to help individual creatures in dire need, ultimately demonstrating the profound impact of kindness on a single life and beyond. Thank you for watching this incredible story of resilience and compassion. What were your thoughts on Emily's courageous decision? Please share your comments below. Rate this video on a scale of 1 to 10, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing wildlife stories.